I am going to share a surprising opinion, one that will probably surprise my friends on both the left and the right. And well, I guess in order to show this to you, I should probably share my screen so you can see what I'm talking about. Seattle protesters declare cop-free zone after police leave precinct. Now, whether this is temporary or permanent, or whether this is going to be a permanent solution where people are actually looking for declaring police-free zones in the United States of America, I think probably most people would like to have someone they know they can call if there's a problem, that they would like to know someone is keeping some semblance of order. But here's going to be probably the surprising thing about why I do have some respect for this. As much as I disagree with cop-free zones as the solution, so this was my post from a while ago, and here is a key part. My interest, as is my habit, is solution. Define the problem, solve the problem. Because I'm sure none of us wants to go through this again, no matter which this is the this that particularly triggered someone. But history shows that whether our president is black or white, a Republican or a Democrat, we talk and then we don't do anything. And by talking here, I mean that like we say stuff, but we don't have real engaging conversations. We don't define problems. We don't define them in a way that we can solve them. So maybe we can do something this time. And so that is part of the idea that I wanted to express here is define the problem, solve the problem. Now, as much as I disagree that the existence of some order-keeping force is the problem and that the solution, therefore, is the elimination of all of those, what I can respect is that they are seeking to impose the solution that their definition of the problem suggests. Now, imagine if you wildly disagree that that's the problem. Well, that's part of why we need to have engagement. We need to have the conversations. We need to sit down with various sides of issues and talk about the problem. What is the problem? How do we know that's the problem? What is our evidence? And as we define the problem, to solve the problem as defined. Now, what if you think, well, the presence of police isn't the problem? Well, then that's beautiful, because then what you just did is you just gave me a definition of the problem, but only in the negative. So what do? Do you think the police are perfect? I don't know anybody who makes that argument. And so what is the solution? Do you think there even is a problem, or that the way things are going is 100% good with you? And if there's anything in there that you think is a problem, and somebody will say, well, I admit that we could probably use some kind of reform. Like, okay, so what do you think is the problem that's going on that you think might need to be reformed? And by having these discussions, we can start to define concrete problems, solvable problems. The definition of a problem is something with a solution. That means that the distant past can't be the problem, because we can't solve the distant past. Now, what can we address? We can address the current problems still going on because of things that happened in the past. But of course, we can't go back and undo the past. And so when we're dealing with all of these things, define the problem, solve the problem, have the discussions, and know how to have the discussions with people you disagree with, and be able to engage, be able to listen, be able to ask for definitions of things. Because we might be able to agree on some things in principle, but we also may be arguing on some things in principle without really having any idea what we're agreeing or disagreeing with, because we're using words differently. And if we can understand how to use these words in some kind of way so that we're actually conveying information in a meaningfully useful way, we have a chance of solving some problems. And we need to develop this understanding, or it's just going to flip. Because if you're one of those people who believes that the problems are the Democrats and that President Trump as a Republican president is going to fix it, well, the last president was a Democrat. So what's he going to do? He's going to do Democrat stuff. Who was president before Obama? Oh, that was Bush. A Republican. What's a Republican going to do? Probably Republican stuff. And then Clinton before that, and Bush one before that, and Reagan before that, and Carter before that. And so we keep going back and forth and who's in control. And so whatever we're going to resolve, we need to get enough collaborative solutions worked out so that in the very next administration, we don't have people trying to undo everything. Because we develop a understanding of the problem so that we can have some understanding of the solutions we're trying to implement because we've had the conversations, so that we as a nation just don't keep flip-flopping from one side to the other and doing and undoing one set of stuff, and then the next time it flips and we're undoing some of the stuff that was done and doing different stuff, and so that we can try to actually get some solutions. Now, I'm old enough to remember 1992. Right now I'm in Orange County, that's one county south of Los Angeles County, where in 1992, thanks to the invocation of the Insurrection Act, we had United States Marines and United States Army on the streets of the United States of America to restore order. That's how bad it got. It got bad enough that we had the military imposing order within our own borders on US soil. It is 28 years later, and here we are. Wouldn't it have been nice if 28 years ago, if the protests and the riots and just the complete chaos that we had in that time prompted people, now note, I'm gonna get to this, this is gonna be important, but it prompted people to go, obviously a lot of people are really upset about this. We should look at this issue and we should really unpack it and figure out, what do we know? How do we know it? What does it mean? And if it's not perfect, how do we make it better? And if it's broken, how do we fix it? And if it's not structured to work very well, how do we reform it? How do we build a new thing? So that we wouldn't be here now, 28 years later. Now, here's a key to me personally. I don't want change based upon whoever yells the loudest. But what I do think is totally warranted with every protest is take a look at the issue. Let's have a discussion. Let's figure out, what is the issue? How do we know? What's the proposed solution? What problem do you think that's solving? What outcome do you think that will produce? So that we can start to really unpack these things so that we're not back here again in 2 or 3 decades. I don't think anybody wants to still be having a problem at this scale that triggers these kind of protests, and in some areas overflows into the kind of riots and arson and vandalism that we've been having adjacent to the protests. And by the way, those are 2 different groups. The group that wants their voice heard versus the group that wants to burn everything to the ground, 2 different groups. There may be some overlap between them, but completely different strategies. I do not put those 2 groups together. I don't conflate them at all. Those are separate to me. But we should listen enough to go, there's something here we have to look at, really look at it, really communicate about, really be transparent about, really unpack and see what is it we literally mean, so that we can solve the problem as defined. Define the problem, solve the problem. And I can have a surprising level of respect for people I wildly disagree with, because at least they are defining the problem as they see it and seeking the solution to the problem as they have defined it. That tells me, at least to them, it's not just rhetoric, that they're willing to look at these 2 things in tandem. If you're going to define it this way, then there's the solution. And I can't even tell you how many times I've had conversations with people. They want to define the problem one way, but they're not interested in the solution that their definition of the problem would naturally suggest. And that's part of what I'm looking for, is this consistency of principle, at least enough for someone to stand by their own definitions and be willing to have a discussion around it. So this is Scott Conway, or Grandmaster Scott with 1T. I hope some of these are helpful in people's thinking and your ability to have productive conversations with other people.